up, book lovers? It is G-Swizz here, and I'm here today to talk about some of my favorite debut novels. If you didn't know, this is a 7 on Sunday topic, and I am the host of 7 on Sunday. I will link the Goodreads page down in the description where you can check it out and you can participate in a topic in the future, or you can suggest a topic. This week's topic, I feel like, was somewhat inspired by the fact that I've been reading a lot of debut novels as of recently. There are some debut novels that I've actually considered to be very recent favorites, or some debut novels that I've just considered to be favorites over the years, and so I decided that I wanted to highlight some of those today. I've got a pretty big list. Personally, as of recently, I've just been very fascinated in reading new voices that have come into the fiction category all of a sudden, because sometimes in new authors you can see influences from the fiction that they've probably read previously or they're just big fans of, or you get a completely fresh new take in certain genres that you just did not expect. I wanted to talk about those today, and I guess without further ado, I want to get straight into some of my favorite debut novels. Now, I want to start off with a debut novel that kind of played a big part in why I selected this topic as a 7 on Sunday topic. This right here, The Blood Trials, is a debut novel that absolutely blew me away. It's a novel that came out this year, and I haven't really been seeing much hype for it, and you know what? That is kind of understandable because yes, it is a debut novel. However, I wanted to highlight it in this video today because I want more people to read it. I have mentioned this a few times on my channel. I mean, as of recently, because I've only read it within the last few months as I'm currently speaking. This debut novel gave me the intense feelings that a long, dense book never usually gives me. Sometimes I'm usually having to wait for the exciting things to happen, but this entire book packed with exciting thing after exciting thing after exciting thing, and honestly, I was on edge as I was reading it. This is definitely one of the best books that I've read in such a long time, and honestly, I could not tell that this was any Davenport's debut. I instantly thought that they would have been an experienced writer based on reading this. I just want to nail the point in again. This book is absolutely incredible, and it does not deserve to be slept on. I would highly recommend you pick it up. If you're not into sci-fi, but you are into fantasy, if you're wanting to bridge into sci-fi, this is a perfect novel, or vice versa. Anyway, I have so many great things to say about this book, but I have to move on. Let's move on to something that's a little bit lighter, but still has a good amount of darkness, and that, my friends, is Valentine by Jodi McAllister. You might have heard of Jodi McAllister's name on my channel previously. Yes, this is the same author of Here for the Right Reasons. I absolutely adored that romance novel. That is one of my favorite romance novels of the year so far. However, Valentine is Jodi's debut. I remember first reading this book and becoming absolutely obsessed over it. This book ended up being one of the first advanced reader copies I had received from a publisher. Honestly, I'm so thankful to have received that advanced reader copy because this debut novel was absolutely stunning, and it really set me up in terms of what to expect from Jodi going forward. I absolutely appreciate her humor. She incorporates that very well in Valentine, but she also very much incorporates that in Here for the Right Reasons, and I know that's something that I would truly appreciate from the books that she writes in the fantasy paranormal-esque genre, but also the romance category. Something I also really appreciate about my reading experience with Jodi McAllister's books is the tension, is the angst, is the high stakes. This had me on the edge of my seat, but it's very funny because Here for the Right Reasons also had me at the edge of my seat in a different way. I really feel like she has translated the tension in her writing from the time she was writing young adult paranormal fiction all the way to the time now where she is writing adult romance fiction. And that's when you know that one of your favorite authors has some talent. If you're watching me right now, and if you have read Here for the Right Reasons, but you haven't yet picked up Valentine, I would highly recommend you do. I also very much recommend Valentine for those who either love Vampire Academy or the Mortal Instruments series, or maybe even the Cruel Prince series. This is a series that I really do highly recommend to paranormal romance lovers, but I also very much recommend it to those who loved Here for the Right Reasons because you have Jodi's signature humor and writing style in here, and honestly, what more could I ask for? Speaking of Australian authors, the next debut author that I would like to bring up is a 2022 debut novelist, and that, my friends, is Vanessa Lynn. The book I bring up is Only a Monster. This is the Bookish Box special edition, so if the cover looks different, that's why. I absolutely adored this book. There were slow moments, I do have to admit. However, I was absolutely compelled by the premise of the story, and honestly, there are stories about monsters in the YA category that I've wanted to hit hard like this book, but I have to say it. This book was the book that finally convinced me that monster YA can be amazing. I was absolutely intrigued in this book from the get-go, and honestly, I have fallen in love with these characters. I need to know what happens next in their lives. Never usually the best when it comes to time travel. However, I really enjoyed the time travel in this novel. And oh boy, the author wrote a very painful cliffhanger in here. I don't know how to deal. Vanessa, please make sure that everyone's okay in the next book. And the next debut novel that I've got to bring up has a guaranteed happily ever after because it is a romance novel, and that, my friends, is The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas. I love this story so much, and I think I appreciate it a lot because of the interracial romance aspect of the story. It actually really inspired me to start working on my own interracial romance novel, which I still need to get onto. I mean, I have it in my head. I keep on plotting it out in my head, but also, I mean, on a Word document. But I need to actually continue writing it because I'm intimidated by it, and I should not be anymore. Don't hold me to it, but maybe I can try NaNoWriMoing this, even though November's a really busy month for me. Maybe I could half NaNoWriMo it. I don't know. That's beside the point. This book really inspired me to start buckling down and to consider writing my own story because I'm currently in an interracial marriage myself, and I just love that stories like this not only just show the importance of interracial romance, it helps a romance audience understand that interracial romances are a thing, and also tackling cultural conflicts is also a very big and important thing in a relationship. This book, as much as, yes, it did have a lot of romantic elements, it had a lot of cultural references in here, and also the family was very much involved in the story. I understand why not many people like this novel because it is dense, it is long for a romance novel, and it takes a while for the actual romantic plot to kick off. This being said, I really appreciated the story personally because it felt very realistic to an interracial romance experience. I absolutely adored The Spanish Love Deception. In my opinion, it is worth the hype. It is definitely one of my favorite romance novels of the year so far. And speaking of romance novels, particularly romance novels that are pretty popular on TikTok like The Spanish Love Deception, I also have to mention The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. I like this novel, and I think it's a very fascinating novel because it's quite the opposite to The Spanish Love Deception. It's not an interracial romance, it's not very dense, it's actually very simplistic. And I think the main gripe that a lot of people do have with The Love Hypothesis in particular is that the characters aren't necessarily very fleshed out. They don't necessarily have too much background to explore, and it is a very basic romantic plot. However, I thoroughly enjoyed the simplicity of this novel, even though there wasn't really too much explored. I really appreciated that overall Ali Hazelwood still explored Olive's demisexuality, and I mean, this is a very healthy romantic dynamic. In terms of the conflict at the end being resolved, I couldn't fault it. It was definitely one of the best romantic resolutions I've ever read. It made me want to read more from Ali Hazelwood instantly, even though she doesn't have a backlist. I was absolutely blown away by it personally. I cannot wait to read more from Ali Hazelwood. She's definitely an author on my watch list. And now I'm going to talk about a book that does not get any hype at all whatsoever, but it is a debut novel, and yes, it is one of my favorite novels of all time. And that, my friends, is Stolen Songbird by Danielle L. Jensen. This belongs to one of my favorite trilogies of all time, the Malediction trilogy, which is a trilogy that was technically hyped up when the first book came out initially, and there hasn't been much hype since. Yes, the Bridge Kingdom series came out. Yes, another series by Danielle L. Jensen came out that was traditionally published. I reckon that got hyped. However, this series has not gotten the hype that it truly deserves, in my opinion. It's one of the best fantasy romance series I've ever read. I don't think I've been so compelled in a hate-to-love romance story / political fantasy like I have with this series. It was an experience to remember. The Malediction trilogy is a series that truly holds a special place in my heart. Don't know what I do about this trilogy. It's made me fall in love with fantasy romance like never before. I'm still completely obsessed with it. And yes, it is a young adult romance series, so yes, it is appropriate to a wide audience. However, not many people are talking about this series, and I reckon that this novel in particular is a phenomenal debut. I still absolutely enjoy her works, and I will continuously read her, even though I haven't necessarily delved into her traditionally published series, which I am looking forward to. However, for some reason, I'm always tempted to reread the series. So one day I gotta do it, but for now, I'm just gonna encourage you guys all to read it. And speaking of amazing first books in favorite series, I've got to talk about A Study in Charlotte, which is the first book in the Charlotte Holmes series by Brittany Cavallaro. This series took me by storm. I read this entire series within 24 hours. I still very much obsess over it, even though it's like only been a few weeks. I've been super obsessive over this series. I cannot wait to read more by Brittany Cavallaro. We just got a cover reveal for the second book in Muse. You guys have no idea how happy and how relieved I am that Muse did not have a cancelled sequel. I was worried, completely worried, because I loved the first book in the Muse duology, but it just so turns out that the sequel to Muse is coming out in 2023. I cannot wait. That is one of my most anticipated releases of next year. Brittany Cavallaro, I just love her writing style. Also, I really love her characters. I felt so compelled when I was reading Muse to read the rest of her series to see if I would fall in love with the characters just as much as I did while I was reading Muse for the very first time. You know what? The Charlotte Holmes series had me falling. I was in a trance. I love Charlotte. I love Jamie. I was so excited to read about these characters, and I also was so compelled to get to know about Charlotte because half this book series is not in Charlotte's perspective, and that's the first half. So a lot of the time you're questioning, what's the deal with Charlotte? Like, you don't really know much about her. And I love how this series took you on a journey to get to know her even more. I really enjoyed the ride. This is definitely one of the best young adult series I have read. I never usually read too much young adult mystery, but what I do know is that this young adult mystery kept me compelled. You know what? The Charlotte Holmes series actually makes me more interested in checking out more young adult mysteries, because honestly, this was one of those series that just proved young adult mystery to be a genre to watch. And I'm a fantasy reader, so that's quite amazing. And the next debut novel I want to bring up in this list today is a 2022 debut, and that, my friends, is This Vicious Grace by Emily Thiede. Just like The Blood Trials, I have talked about this book a lot in very recent times, so I'm not gonna really delve too much into it. I would just suggest that if you go into this book, you go into it knowing nothing. If you know something about it already, try to put what you know at the back of your head. I had no expectations going into this book, and honestly, that was the best way to go into it because I was thoroughly impressed. It was an instant 5 out of 5 stars for me. Yes, this book is a slow burn, and I do have to warn you about that. It definitely takes a while to get into, but once you make it up to a certain point, you will not want to put this book down, because that is how I felt. I thought to myself, oh, okay, you know, maybe this was gonna be like a 3-star read or a 4-star read. I don't know, I wasn't really that interested from the very beginning. However, as this book took a very specific plot twist, I was absolutely blown away and I could not stop reading. I was absolutely obsessing over this book, and I need more. And I also know that the sequel and the finale is one of my most anticipated reads of next year. This book just excites me talking about it. But I don't want to talk about it too much because I might be making some of you guys sick of it as I'm talking about it. But you know what? It's for a worthy cause. The second last book I selected for this video today is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sue Lynn Tan. This was a debut novel I was not expecting to like in the way that I liked it. I actually expected this novel to be about one thing, and it ended up being about something completely different. And I'm not gonna lie, when the tone shifted from being something that I thought it was gonna be to the thing that it was, I was starting to get disappointed. But as I continued on with the story, I realized that this story became something that I didn't know that I needed. I cannot believe that Sue Lynn Tan had that kind of power, but she did. And she absolutely nailed it. I love the direction of the story. And honestly, 100 pages in, I didn't think I was going to. It was a similar situation to This Vicious Grace, where I started this book off and I didn't necessarily expect it to be one of my favorites, and it did blow me away. I was very much impressed by Daughter of the Moon Goddess, and I honestly cannot wait to continue with the sequel / finale. I'm not ready for it to be the finale, but what I do know is that Sue Lynn Tan is going to be an author I'm going to watch out for in terms of their publications, because I want to read more from them. They did an absolute amazing job with this novel. And once again, I couldn't actually tell that this was a debut novel because I felt like they wrote it very well and they built the world very well. Daughter of the Moon Goddess is one that I do highly recommend if you haven't checked it out yet. And the last but certainly not the least out of the debut novels that I have to bring up today, I'm gonna bring up probably my favorite debut novel of all time. And that, my friends, is Divergent. I know a lot of you guys are gonna be thinking, what? Out of all books, you're gonna bring up Divergent. I understand why a lot of you guys do disagree. I'm just talking about Divergent here as a debut novel. I'm not talking about the entire series if you happen to have a problem with the entire series. What I do have to say about this debut novel in its defense is that you cannot argue with the fact that at the time this debut novel did come out, the concept of Divergent was quite unique. It wasn't necessarily a post-apocalyptic fantasy that felt too apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic when I was reading it. It didn't necessarily feel like The Hunger Games or Legend or The Maze Runner. It had a different kind of intensity. The intensity that I had while reading it was different because at times it had its slow moments, at times it had its more scientific based moments, at times we were more having conversations about characteristics and how your brain works. I found that very fascinating. As much as I did enjoy the plot of Divergent, I very much also enjoyed the exposition in this book. I enjoyed the character building moments. I enjoyed following every single one of these characters. And yes, when we lost some of our favorite characters in the first book, I was definitely heartbroken, but that was just the way that the story had to continue. That was realistic for this world. I still admire Veronica for writing Divergent. This first novel, in my opinion, was a great way to kick off a sci-fi writing career, because that is what Veronica Roth has decided to pursue. And you know what? I'm still watching her career very closely. It's very difficult for me to love her new works as much as I do love Divergent. I mean, Chosen Ones, however, that is an exception. I absolutely adore Chosen Ones, but honestly, honestly, I look back at this book very fondly, and also I believe that she published it at the age of 21. I'm 26 right now, and I couldn't write a novel half as good as this book right now. I mean, I could be wrong if I actually decided to write my novel, but you know what? My hat will always go off to Veronica for writing Divergent, and for this being her debut novel. So I guess that's gonna be it for this video today, book lovers. If you happen to stay till the end of the video, leave me the star emoji. If you also happen to enjoy this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet already. Join the amazing community of book lovers. And also, I have social medias at GSfizzleBooks on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm also Goodreads. That's www.goodreads.com/gsfizzle. And finally, I'm at TikTok. I'm at GSfizzle on TikTok if you want to follow me there for some bookish content. I love you, book lovers, and I will see you later. Peace.
Started out with half and I flipped it into double. Started out with half and I flipped it into double.